On the morning of February 18, 2003, passengers on the Daegu subway bought tickets to their own deaths. They did not know that the materials used in the train cars would release toxic fumes when burned. They did not know that there were no fire extinguishers on the trains and that the doors could become permanently locked. The city authorities knew all this, but kept quiet, saving money on public safety. The result: 192 people died in 6 minutes, and those responsible went unpunished. The official version of events seems simple. A mentally ill man set fire to a subway train. The fire quickly spread through the cars, and people suffocated from the smoke. The authorities called it a tragic accident, the act of a lone man suffering from depression after a stroke. But the investigation revealed a completely different picture. The burned-out carriages contained materials that release hydrogen cyanide, a deadly poisonous gas, when burned. The company that operated the subway chose these materials deliberately because they were cheaper than fire-resistant alternatives. There were no fire extinguishers on the trains. There were no sprinklers or proper emergency lighting at the station. 79 passengers died not from the fire, but from suffocation. They were locked in their carriages after the driver, in a panic, took the master key with him to save his own life. Without the key, the doors were locked and people were unable to get out. The management of the Daegu Metropolitan Transit Corporation was aware of the danger of flammable materials. The Daegu city authorities approved the specifications for the carriages. Everyone understood the risks but remained silent, because eliminating the problems would have required additional expenditure. After the tragedy, the court sentenced the train drivers to 4 and 5 years in prison. The dispatchers received 1 to 2 years. At the same time, none of those who made decisions to save money at the expense of passenger safety were held criminally responsible. The company's CEO was even acquitted of charges of concealing evidence. This story is about how the system created the conditions for mass death long before a sick man set fire to the first train. That morning, trains 1079 and 1080 were carrying ordinary people. Around 10 a.m. was a convenient time for those who worked in shopping centers that opened at 10:30. Young saleswomen and consultants were heading to work. Students were going to classes at universities in the city center. Office workers were rushing to business meetings. Many of the passengers were young people who were just starting their independent lives. They were renting apartments, building careers, falling in love, and arguing with their parents over trifles. Some had theater tickets for the weekend in their pockets. Some were planning to propose to their girlfriends. Some just wanted to get to work on time so they wouldn't get a reprimand from their boss. None of them knew that the company operating the subway had cut corners on their safety, that the materials in the cars emitted deadly gas when burned, that there were no fire extinguishers on the trains and no sprinklers at the stations, that the emergency lighting system did not work and the doors could jam, turning the car into a gas chamber. Passengers trusted the transport system. They bought tickets, boarded trains, and expected to be taken safely to their destinations. That trust was betrayed by those responsible for their lives, who chose profit over human lives. In the final minutes, many tried to contact their loved ones on their cell phones. Cell phone operators later provided recordings of these calls to investigators to help identify the victims. These last conversations showed that even in the face of death, people thought not of themselves but of those they loved. Construction of the Daegu subway began in 1991 when the city was experiencing rapid economic growth. In the 40 years since the Korean War, the population had increased tenfold, and the Underground Railway was supposed to solve transportation problems, but the project was immediately met with tragedy. In 1995, during construction, a gas explosion killed 101 people, including 42 school children. The authorities tightened control over the construction site, but did not change their approach to the future safety of the system. Daegu Metropolitan Transit Corporation, a municipal company, was responsible for the construction and operation of the metro. Real power belonged to Daegu Mayor Cho Hae-nyun, who controlled the budget, and in 2003, Yoon Jin-tae was the CEO of DTRO. All key decisions were made with an eye on saving city funds. When selecting materials for the cars in the mid-1990s, the dilemma was simple. Fire-resistant materials such as stainless steel were expensive. Vinyl, plastic, and polyurethane foam were significantly cheaper. DTRO chose to save money without formally violating the law, as national standards at the time did not require fire-resistant materials. Following the same logic, fire extinguishers, sprinklers, and high-quality ventilation systems were also rejected. By 2003, Line 1 had been operating for 6 years as a ticking time bomb. The cars were made of materials that emit deadly gases when burned. The drivers did not know how to act in case of fire. The stations did not have basic safety equipment. The system was created by people who valued budget savings over human lives, and on February 18th, the inevitable happened. On February 18th, 2003, Kim Dae-han woke up with a firm intention. The 56-year-old former taxi driver had not worked for 2 years after suffering a stroke, was depressed, and blamed the doctors for his problems. 10 days earlier, he had threatened to burn down the hospital, but his son did not take the threat seriously. That morning, Kim filled 2 plastic containers with gasoline, took a lighter, and headed for the subway station. At 9:53 a.m., train number 1079 stopped at Jungangno Station. Kim took out the containers and began fiddling with the lighter. Passengers tried to stop him, but in the struggle, the liquid spilled and ignited. The fire instantly engulfed the car, which was filled with flammable materials. Kim, who was burned, and several passengers ran out onto the platform, but the rest suffocated in the toxic smoke within 2 minutes. The driver of the burning train, Choi Jong-hwan, made a fatal mistake. Instead of immediately reporting the fire to the control center, he focused on evacuating the passengers from his train. His silence allowed the second train to continue toward the station, where death awaited it. Dispatchers noticed smoke on their monitors at around 9:55 a.m., but did not understand the scale of the disaster. The driver of the approaching train, number 1080, Choi Sang-yeol, was told, "Proceed with caution. There is a fire at the station." This instruction was a death sentence for 79 passengers. At 9:57 a.m., train number 1080 entered hell. The platform was filled with smoke, and the burning train was standing 3 feet away from them. The doors opened, but the driver immediately closed them and told the passengers to stay in their seats and wait for instructions. When the fire alarm went off and the power went out, Choi panicked and left the train, taking the master key with him. The doors were locked forever. Each of these decisions alone might not have led to disaster, but together they created a perfect chain of death in a system where saving money on safety was more important than human lives. The fire turned the train into a deadly trap in 5 minutes. By 9:58 a.m., both trains were completely engulfed in flames, and the station was filled with toxic smoke from burning plastic and vinyl. The temperature rose to several hundred degrees, but most people died not from the fire, but from poisoning by toxic gases. Panic broke out on the platform. Passengers waiting for the train rushed to the exits, but the lack of emergency lighting turned the evacuation into chaos. People fell on the stairs, lost their bearings in the thick smoke, and screamed for help. Some tried to crawl along the floor where the air was cleaner, but most suffocated without finding a way out. Agony began in the blocked train number 1080. 79 passengers banged on the doors and windows, but the sturdy glass did not give way, and the doors were jammed shut without power. Smoke filled the carriages, and people called their loved ones, realizing that they would not escape. After a few minutes, silence fell over the train. The first firefighters arrived 15 minutes after the disaster began, but they couldn't get into the station. The toxic smoke was so thick that the rescuers would have been poisoned in seconds. More than 1,000 firefighters took part in the operation, but they could only wait for the smoke to clear. The fire was extinguished by 1:30 p.m., but the station remained inaccessible for another 3 hours. When rescuers finally descended onto the platform at 4 p.m., there was no hope for survivors. Many bodies were burned beyond recognition and had to be identified by DNA. All 79 passengers on train 1080 were sitting in their seats, as if they had simply fallen asleep. 192 people died in a matter of minutes in a system that was supposed to protect them. Now investigators had to find out who turned a normal commute into a journey to nowhere. The initial results of the investigation seemed obvious. Kim Dae-han immediately confessed to arson, showing investigators how he filled plastic containers with gasoline and set the liquid on fire in the train car. Depression after a stroke, unemployment, and conflict with doctors. The motives for the crime seemed clear. The case could have been closed as an act of a mentally ill person, but technical expertise turned the picture upside down. Analysis of the burned carriages showed that the upholstery and panel materials emitted hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide when burned, deadly poisonous substances. Polyurethane foam, vinyl, and plastic turned into chemical weapons at a temperature of only 572 degrees Fahrenheit. Experts determined that most of the victims died from poisoning, not burns. Records of the control center's communications revealed a chain of fatal mistakes. At 9:55 a.m., dispatchers noticed smoke on their monitors, but gave the driver of train 1080 the confusing order to proceed with caution. The evacuation order was not given until 9:59 a.m., when it was already too late. Video recordings confirmed that the surveillance system did not allow the true scale of the disaster to be assessed. An examination of the contracts for the supply of the carriages revealed the main truth. DTRO deliberately chose the cheapest materials, even though fire-resistant alternatives were available. The company saved millions of won by sacrificing passenger safety. Documents showed that management was aware of the flammability of the materials but considered fires unlikely. Investigators found systemic safety violations. There were no fire extinguishers on the trains, sprinklers did not work at the station, and emergency lighting was faulty. Train drivers had never received fire safety training. The ventilation system was unable to cope with the smoke. It gradually became clear that Kim Dae-han had merely pulled the trigger of a weapon that had been created by others over many years. The real culprits behind the disaster sat in the offices of DTRO and the City Hall, making decisions that saved money but cost human lives. The Daegu subway safety system was built on a dangerous illusion. DTRO management believed that fires in the subway were unlikely, so it was possible to save money on safety measures. When reality shattered this illusion on February 18th, every element of the system failed the people at a critical moment. Automatic fire sensors worked correctly, cutting off power to the line, but they were designed without considering the consequences. The power outage locked the doors of train 1080, turning the car into a gas chamber. The ventilation system designed for normal subway operation could not cope with the toxic smoke from the burning materials. Thick clouds of hydrogen cyanide filled the station within minutes. Communication between dispatchers and drivers was working, but people did not know how to use it in an extreme situation. Driver Choi Jung-hwan did not report the fire, thinking first about evacuating his passengers. Dispatchers saw smoke on their monitors, but gave their colleague a vague command to proceed with caution instead of a clear order to evacuate. Train driver Choi Sang-yeol of train 1080 made a fatal mistake, following his instinct for self-preservation. By closing the doors to protect against smoke and leaving the train with the master key, he doomed 79 passengers to death. There were alternatives: manually opening the doors, evacuating through the tunnel, using fire extinguishers. But there were no fire extinguishers, no emergency lighting, and the staff had not been trained. The 1995 explosion should have been a warning about the dangers of underground structures, but the lesson was only half learned, with construction controls tightened but operational safety ignored. As a result, the metro became a beautifully designed death trap. Every link in the system, from the materials used in the cars to the training of the staff, was designed to minimize costs. When all these savings came together, the result was a disaster that could have been prevented at any stage. After the tragedy, DTRO management and Daegu city authorities followed a well-rehearsed script. Instead of acknowledging systemic failures, they focused their attention on Kim Dae-han. A mentally ill arsonist became a convenient explanation for the disaster, which deflected questions about years of cost-cutting at the expense of passenger safety. DTRO CEO Yoon Jin-tae found himself at the center of the accusations, but skillfully avoided responsibility. When investigators accused him of destroying evidence by hastily cleaning up the station after the fire, Yoon found support in the judicial system. South Korea's Supreme Court acquitted him in 2004, ruling that cleaning the site was a necessary measure, not an attempt to hide evidence. Daegu Mayor Cho Hae-nyung, who had controlled DTRO's budget since 1995, remained completely uninvolved in the investigation. His administration approved specifications for carriages containing flammable materials and approved savings on safety systems, but no one questioned these decisions. Cho completed his term in 2006 without ever being held accountable for the policies that led to the deaths of 192 people. The defense of the system was based on simple logic. Formally, no one had broken the law. In the 1990s, national standards did not require fire-resistant materials in subway cars. The absence of fire extinguishers and sprinklers was also not a direct violation. DTRO chose the cheapest of the approved options, and legally, this was correct. The economic motives were obvious. The construction of the metro cost the city billions of won, and every saving seemed reasonable. Fire-resistant materials were several times more expensive than vinyl and plastic. Fire extinguishing systems required constant maintenance. Training staff took time and money. In the pursuit of rapid economic growth in the 1990s, safety seemed a secondary concern. But behind the economic calculations were specific careers and reputations. Cho Hae-nyung had built his political career on the successful development of urban infrastructure. The rapid and inexpensive construction of the subway was his achievement. Admitting that the system had been built with fatal flaws would have meant destroying his own political future. The DTRO leadership acted according to the same logic. Yoon Jin-tae and his predecessors were appointed for their ability to control spending, not for ensuring safety. The appointment system in municipal companies encouraged savings and punished budget overruns. When disaster struck, the same system protected its own. The investigation focused on the drivers and dispatchers, the people who made decisions in critical moments, but did not create the conditions for the tragedy. Those who had been saving money at the expense of human lives for years remained in the shadows, protected by the lack of direct evidence of corruption and formal compliance with outdated laws. The South Korean judicial system quickly identified those responsible for the Daegu subway tragedy. In August 2003, arsonist Kim Dae-han was sentenced to life imprisonment for multiple murders. The victims' families demanded the death penalty, but the court took into account his mental state and remorse. Kim died in prison in 2004 from a second stroke, without serving his sentence. The train drivers were severely punished for their actions in those critical moments. Choi Sang-yeol, who took the key from train 1080, received 5 years in prison for the unintentional murder of 79 passengers. Choi Jong-hwan, who failed to report the fire to dispatchers, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The courts found them guilty of negligence, despite the lack of training for dealing with fires. 9 mid-level DTRO employees received lighter sentences ranging from 1 to 3 years, many of them suspended. Dispatchers who gave the inadequate command to proceed with caution, and managers responsible for training staff received symbolic punishments. The courts considered their actions less critical to the development of the disaster. At the same time, none of the senior management faced criminal charges. DTRO CEO Yoon Jin-tae escaped punishment, and Mayor Cho Hae-nyang, who had been in charge of safety policy since 1995, was not even brought to trial. Those who made decisions to save money at the expense of human lives went unpunished. Compensation for the victims was not paid from the pockets of those responsible, but from public donations. South Korean citizens raised 71 billion won, of which 52.5 billion was allocated to the families of the deceased and the injured. The families filed civil lawsuits against DTRO and the city government, but most of the cases were settled through the same donation fund. The disparity in punishment outraged the public. The perpetrators received real prison terms, while those who created the system that led to the tragedy retained their freedom and reputation. The victims' families openly criticized this justice, pointing out that the train drivers had become scapegoats for the failures of the entire system. The judicial system demonstrated a classic principle: responsibility lies with those who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, not with those who spent years creating the conditions for disaster. Every February 18th, the families of the victims bring flowers to the memorial plaque at Yungangno Station. In 2008, a safety park was opened in Daegu, where visitors can experience a simulated subway fire and learn how to act in extreme situations. The memory of the 192 victims lives on in granite and educational programs. And what happened to those who created the conditions for the tragedy? Mayor Cho Hae-nyang quietly completed his term in 2006. DTRO CEO Yoon Jin-tae was acquitted by the court and disappeared from public view. The company's top management, which approved the deadly specifications for the carriages, was never punished. The reforms were impressive. By 2009, all subway cars in South Korea were equipped with fire-resistant materials. Mandatory fire extinguishers, sprinklers, and improved ventilation were introduced. Staff undergo regular fire safety training. In 2014, when a 71-year-old man attempted to set fire to a train in the Seoul subway, the fire was contained within minutes with no casualties. But the main questions remain unanswered. The system that 20 years ago prioritized savings over human lives still controls the country's transport. The same principles of appointment, the same logic of cost minimization, the same mechanisms of protection from liability. A memorial plaque at Yungangno Station reminds us of the price of such decisions. But as long as none of those responsible have paid the price, there is no guarantee that history will not repeat itself in another place and at another time. The memory lives on, but justice has not been served. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please write in the comments what you think about this case. If you liked our work, don't forget to like this video. It really helps us grow our channel. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos. We try to pick the rarest and most interesting events. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.